So the next race we will be doing will be the Dwarves. And I started with the humans because they're the most common, and then we will proceed in an alphabetical manner, as is presented in the 3.5 book, and so Dwarves will be next. The strong, hardy, but somewhat on the short side Dwarves. And we will start with 5th edition, because we're starting with 5th edition with our races. So let us look at the Dwarf here. We have, first, the ability score increase. +2 to Constitution. This represents the Dwarven hardihood. Then we get age. Now, Dwarves are considered adults at the age of 50 and considered to be dying of old age at around 350 years. But it does state that they age at the same rate as humans. And so this adulthood at 50 years is primarily cultural, not biological. So it's not that Dwarves are teenagers for 30 years. No, they're just, in their culture, they're not considered an adult until they're 50 years old. Now, alignment generally are lawful and tend towards good. Now, a Dwarven size, this is an interesting thing. Dwarves are medium because they stand between 4 and 5 feet, and to be small, you have to be less than 4 feet. But their speed is only 25 feet. Unlike the human, which had 30 feet, also a medium, but they're on the short side of medium, so they only get 25. But they have a specialty in that their speed is not reduced for wearing heavy armor. And this, again, is a representation of the strength, the natural strength and hardiness of dwarves. They can carry the extra weight for longer periods of time without being affected by it. After speed, we have dark vision, out to 60 feet. Then we have what is called Dwarven Resilience. And this just gives you advantage on saving throws against poison, as well as resistance to poison damage, which means anything that does poison damage is reduced by half. Then we get Dwarven Combat Training. This gives you proficiency with the battle axe, hand axe, throwing hammer, and war hammer. However, throwing hammer is actually called a light hammer, not a throwing hammer. The light hammer has a range that you can throw it. And so that should say light hammer. We then get tool proficiency, which you can choose one of the smith, brewer, or mason tools. Now, tool proficiencies, as I say, we'll talk about them in a future video. So we'll get that to another video when we talk about skills. But they get a free, or they get a bonus tool proficiency that is either smith tools, brewer supplies, or mason tools. They then have this ability of stone cutting. As it says here, whenever you make an intelligence history check related to the origin of stonework, you are considered proficient in the history skill and add double your proficiency bonus to the check instead of your normal proficiency bonus. So to know the origin, it doesn't give you any knowledge of quality, of function, or anything, just origin when you do the history skill. And that's it. But it's a nice little flavor for dwarves. We then get languages. They speak Common and they speak Dwarvish, because they get a racial language and then everybody gets Common. It does describe the Dwarven language, but we don't need to worry about that. We then have 2 subraces. The first subrace is the Hill Dwarf. But you get 2 things for being a Hill Dwarf. First, you get an increase to your wisdom of 1 point. So, adding this with the +2 that you get from being a dwarf, +2 to Constitution from being a dwarf, you now have a total of a +3. You also, though, this is a really significant thing, is that you get 1 extra hit point every level. So, that's the 2 things you get as a Hill Dwarf. Then our second subrace is the Mountain Dwarf. They're a little bigger, stronger, just slightly. What do they get? Now, this is an interesting thing here. They first get a +2 to their strength. So they get a +2 to Constitution as a dwarf, and then a +2 to strength as a mountain dwarf. This means the mountain dwarf gets a total of a +4. That is the second highest. The humans have the highest with a +6, but the mountain dwarf has the second highest with a total of a +4. The only other race that gets a total of a +4 is the half-elf. And we'll talk about that in more detail, but the mountain dwarf gets the second highest increase to ability scores of any race. He also gets armor training, getting proficiency with light and medium armor. So a Dwarven wizard in 5th edition can wear armor while casting. Because while he doesn't get proficiency from being a wizard, he does get it from being a mountain dwarf. So, depending on how you play it, that armor proficiency could be worthless, because most combat classes already have proficiency in light and medium armor. Fighters, barbarians, I believe, rangers, paladins, even the rogue has at least light armor. Clerics have light and medium armor. Druids have at least light. I can't remember if they have medium, but most classes have light armor proficiency. I think the sorcerer, wizard, and warlock. Actually, I think the warlock has light too. So I think the sorcerer and wizard are the only two that don't have any armor proficiency, and most have medium armor proficiency. So this thing is not really going to be that valuable as a player, because you probably get this from a class. This is why you get a +2 to strength. It balances it out, because this is actually a very weak thing. They have to give it a little bit of a boost on the increase, on the abilities for increase. Give them a +2 instead of a +1 to make it approximate the power level of the Hill Dwarf. But let us take this and let us compare it to 3rd edition. And there are several differences between these two editions. Most of them based in game mechanics. Because the game mechanics changed, they had to change a number of the things. But there are some things that are not simply due to game mechanics. So let us look at 3rd edition Dwarves. Now, first thing you will note, +2 to Constitution, just like in 5th edition. However, they get a -2 to Charisma. And if you'll recall, in my overview of the races, I mentioned, in 5th edition, everybody gets a bonus. Everybody gets an increase. But in 3rd edition, most races get both an increase to one ability, but a decrease to another one. That's what we have here. The dwarf gets +2 to Constitution, again, representing the hardihood of dwarves and their general robustness, but a -2 to Charisma. And they describe this, they explain this. Dwarves are stout and tough, but tend to be gruff and reserved. +2 Constitution, -2 Charisma. Now, they are still medium, just as they are in 5th. And their speed, however, is only 20. In 5th, it was 25. And you'll note this with other races, too. Many races, the smaller ones, the shorter ones, in 3rd edition, only had a movement of 20. That was increased to 25 in 5th edition. But you will note they have the same notation here. Dwarves can move at this speed even when wearing medium or heavy armor. They also have dark vision out to 60 feet, just like in 5th edition. Stone cutting. Now, stone cutting exists in 5th edition, but you will note some significant differences here. Remember, in 5th edition, stone cutting just basically gave you a proficiency and bonus to a history check to know the origin of stonework. Now, in 3rd edition, it gives you a +2 racial bonus on search checks to notice unusual stonework. This includes sliding walls, stonework traps, new construction, even when it's designed to look like the old construction, unsafe stone surfaces, shaky ceilings. All these things are included in unusual stonework. Another thing that's included in unusual stonework, you'll notice, something that isn't stone but is designed to look like stone is included in this unusual stonework. And we get a +2 when we are searching. So if there's a secret door in a stone wall where the wall is supposed to fold out, open up, however, maybe the stone rises up. If it's made of stone, the dwarf gets a +2 on his search check to find that secret door because it's made of stone. If the floor is going to open up or if the ceiling fall, the dwarf gets a +2 on his search check to detect those traps. And not only that, see, not just does he get a +2 when he's doing these searches, but it also states a dwarf who merely comes within 10 feet of unusual stonework can make a search check as if they were actively searching. And a dwarf can use this stone cunning to find stonework traps as if he was a rogue. Because in 3rd edition, finding and disarming traps is a rogue specialty. But a dwarf, if it's a stonework trap, a dwarf can. And finally, using this stone cunning, a dwarf can always tell you how far underground he is. In the same way as it says, the same way as a human can always sense what direction is up, a dwarf can always tell you how far underground he is. This, more complicated, but a whole lot more useful than just determining the origin of stonework. In 5th edition, the dwarf gets no bonus to find stone doors, stone traps, or to identify something as not being stone, but being made to look like stone. Now, you could say that with the history skill, he could tell what section of a stonework is older than what section. He could tell what's newer, what's older. But that said, he can't tell you anything else with stone cunning in 5th edition. In 3rd edition, not only can he do all this stuff, not only can he find the door, not only does he get the bonus to finding doors and traps and the like dealing with stone, but he gets an automatic check. He doesn't even have to be looking for it. He just walks past it and he can check to see if he found it. It's a lot more powerful, and even without the automatic roll, it's a lot more powerful in 3rd edition than it is in 5th. In 3rd edition, we then get weapon familiarity. And this is one that is altered because of game mechanics. So in this it states, dwarves may treat dwarven war axe and dwarven urgroshes as martial weapons rather than exotic weapons. Now, first of all, neither of these weapons exist in 5th edition, not in the Player's Handbook anyways. And there are no exotic weapons. It is either simple or martial, therefore it doesn't translate. But 5th edition does give the weapon training where you are skilled with the battle axe, great axe, light hammer, and warhammer. And it's basically the same thing, but built in the mechanics, or built to suit the mechanics of whatever edition you're in. Now, the next few things are a little unique, pretty unique to 3rd edition. So I'm going to skip down just a little here because there's a lot of bonuses that a dwarf will get in 3rd edition that he doesn't get in 5th. So let us go down just to the end first, and we look at languages. And in 3rd edition, it's the same as in 5th. A dwarf speaks Common and Dwarven. Those are his starting languages. But the dwarf also gets bonus languages if he is intelligent enough, and he is restricted in his bonus languages that he can take. Unlike humans, as I mentioned, who have no restrictions, the dwarf has a list here of languages that he can take as bonus languages. That's Giant, Gnome, Goblin, Orc, Terran, and Undercommon. 6 that he can choose from. So an extremely intelligent dwarf with an 18 intelligence gets 4 of those 6. That's his list. The last thing to mention is, again, the favorite class for a dwarf is the fighter. Dwarven fighter is kind of the epitome of the dwarf in 3rd edition. Of course, favorite classes do not exist in 5th. Now let us go back and look at some of these other bonuses that a dwarf gets. So first we have listed here a +2 racial bonus on saving throws against poison. Now this is kind of basically the Dwarven Resilience from 5th edition. This gives you advantage and resistance to poison. This just gives you a +2 on saving throws. Not actually quite as powerful in 3rd edition as it is in 5th, but it's still there. These other ones, though, are completely unique to 3rd edition. They do not exist in 5th in any way. So first of all, we have a +2 racial bonus on saving throws against spells and spell-like effects. The dwarves don't have this magic resistance in 5th edition. We also get a +1 racial bonus on attack rolls against orcs and goblinoids. And this is representing a specialized training of dwarves. We also have a +4 bonus, dodge bonus to armor class against monsters of the giant type, which would include ogres, trolls, and hill giants, and all that stuff. And again, this is a specialized training of dwarves. This is not an innate ability. This is a cultural ability, which is partly why I've never used this or the bonus to attack against goblins and orcs, because they are cultural, not actually racial. And so I generally don't use them, but they are here. And I will point out one thing. It says a dodge bonus to armor class. That is significant in 3rd edition because of the various types of bonuses. But then we have these last two here. We have a +2 racial bonus on appraise checks related to stone and metal. And we have a +2 on craft checks related to stone and metal. So we have these bonuses to other skills. The stone cutting was all about searching and finding various stone-related stuff. These two are different skill bonuses. Very much related to stone cutting, but still listed separately. Finally, we have this dwarven stability here. And this is the dwarves get a +4 on ability checks to resist being what's called bull rushed or tripped. And bull rushed is basically being shoved aside. And now this only applies if they got both feet squarely on the ground. They're solidly placed. Dwarves, they're solid guys. They sit closer to the ground. Their center of gravity is lower, so they get a +4 to resist being pushed or knocked over. Now, they don't get it if they're riding a mount, if they're climbing. They have to have both feet firmly planted on the ground, and they get this +4. This also does not exist in 5th edition. And so when we're comparing these things, there are some things in 5th that do not exist in 3rd. There are some things in 3rd that do not exist in 5th. But the general concept is still there. So we still +2 Constitution, although they also get a minus to Charisma. We have Stone Cunning, fairly weak and generally useless in my opinion for 5th edition. Stone Cunning, actually fairly significant ability for a dwarf in 5th. In 3rd. The weapon training translates because of the change of rules. Dwarven resiliency, we still have the extra bonus to resist poison. Languages are the same. We got sub-races in 5th that do not exist in 3rd. And we have a number of extra modifiers in 3rd that do not exist in 5th. And of course, I will also point out that these modifiers, because of the mechanics of 5th edition, because of primarily the proficiency bonus, really, but because of this, these things would not translate effectively into 5th edition. You really just couldn't do it. And so I kind of understand why they didn't put it in there, but it is in there in 3rd and not in 5th. And so, yes, we have these differences, but the basic concept of the races remains the same. And as I say, most things do translate between the two. And that's a basic look at the dwarves. So, our next race will be the elves.